Welcome to the Random Ramblings podcast. I'm Ronan, your host on this journey through life's everyday moments. Each week we explore a variety of topics, from personal reflections and everyday experiences to thought-provoking discussions on life's nuances. Whether you're seeking insight, connection, or simply a moment of contemplation, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's episode. What's up, Visakuo? How things going? Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ronan. No, it's been very good, and I feel like it's been a while since we last spoke, so
Yeah.
I'm very excited to do this with you.
Yeah, so to give a bit of background, it's like how we know each other and that we both went to Calvin University, and we were in a few classes together. We were in like an internship class where we were partnered up, and then we were also in a medical ethics class. So I kind of got to know you on a personal level, on a classmate level. But do you want to give us a bit of a background, like a short, like kind of like a short history, I guess, of like how you came to America and Calvin University?
Sure, I think I'll try to keep this short. So
Yeah.
I'm originally from India, and I did most of my schooling, so pretty much till high school in India, and then I discovered Calvin University my senior year of high school, and then I applied and I got in, and at that time it just made the most sense for me in terms of the program and also like the financial aid they were offering. So I came to Calvin as an international student, started the pre-med program. I majored in biology and biochemistry, and just proceeded with pre-med, did the things you needed to do, and yeah, and then like applied to med school last year, and then very fortunately got in, and now I'm just sort of like in my gap year working a little bit, and also just spending time with friends, resting a little bit before med school starts.
Nice. No, for sure. No, it's nice to finally have a break. I mean, this is the whole med school journey takes like 2 years. So, it's definitely, well, I guess, 4 or 5 years, with undergrad included there. But yeah, so why I really wanted you on today's episode was you got an insane grade for that MCAT. Not many people, or no one that I know got in, you got in the 97th percentile. You were telling me 520 on the MCAT. Not many people have managed to achieve that, and you actually got into a very prestigious program, not just any med school, you got into the DO PhD program at Michigan State University. I want to ask you a few questions, how you did all of this, but, let's start from the very beginning. So you said you took, for your undergrad, biochemistry, you double majored in biochemistry and biology. Do you think that was like a good major that prepared you for the MCAT, for all the med school subjects and questions and all of that was required?
Yeah, I'd say certainly it was. I think both the majors really helped me build um, the basic sciences I needed to do well in the MCAT. So for people who haven't looked into the MCAT before, the MCAT's divided into four sections. There's the CP, which is like chem phys. There's CARS, which is like critical analysis and reasoning. BB, which is biology, biochemistry, and PSS, which is psych and social. And BB and CP are really hard in the sciences, and I think what University offered me through their biology and biochemistry programs was a very solid foundation for those courses. I will caveat and say that I don't think that is necessary. I just took those courses those majors because I didn't have an idea what else I wanted to explore, what other majors I wanted to explore. And I think there's definitely other people who have done unconventional majors, like let's say music, but still taken like a pre-med track and have been able to achieve excellent MCAT scores. So I wouldn't say it's just a major thing, but for me, it definitely helped.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, no, that's great. So let's talk about the whole kind of like the experience and the initial things there. So obviously one of the main things that while you're doing your undergrad and preparing and even before the MCAT is gaining that clinical experience. I was a nurse technician in my undergrad to kind of gain that. Could you provide us kind of what you did as your clinical experience?
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that that's something you have to do before or like in the very beginning, because that's something I did afterwards, right? So,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I started getting my clinical experience closer to my junior or senior year, which I think is a little later. But what I
Yeah.
did was, um, in my senior, towards the start of my senior, I wanted to get more experience with patients, and I wanted to find an experience that was a little bit unconventional that I feel like would help me, um, would give me experience in not just like the hospital setting, but with like I guess with like more different populations. So I found a place called Olivia's Gift. That's an assisted living home for people with disabilities. And I joined that place and I started working there as we call it direct care support professional. And we pretty much help them with everything they need to thrive during the day. So, and I was doing that part time throughout my school year and a little bit into my gap year as well. So that was one avenue of, I guess, patient care experience. And the other thing I did was I volunteered with an organization called Faith Hospice in my senior year, and they're a faith-based organization. That means that they have a mission that's grounded in the Christian belief. It doesn't have to be, but that organization specifically is. And they would provide pretty much comfort care for people receiving hospice care, which is like end-of-life care. And I used to play the violin for these patients receiving end-of-life care. So both of those things were really good ways for me to get very good experience with patients.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, that sounds interesting. And do you kind of have, because, obviously you got into med school, so obviously your clinical experience was, enough, and you had enough hours under your belt and everything to get in. Do you have maybe like any advice to pre-med students of maybe how many hours are they looking at in getting volunteering and clinical experience? Do you have like a rough estimate of kind of hours or years or months that they have to do of, these experiences?
Yeah, I think this is just statistics I learned from my pre-health advisor, but in our university, at least, the average number of hours of students who were accepted in the medical school, this is like clinical experience hours, was 500.
Yeah.
So
So I
all
mean,
the
it's
students who
pretty
were
high.
accepted,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
it was
exactly. So
pretty
it's
high.
pretty high. So basically got to be taking like a part-time job. Another thing I want to throw out there is a lot of us international students, this is a major hurdle that we kind of have to overcome in America is, we're not allowed to work off campus, but there is a way around this, legally and through our visas, etc. And that is something that Calvin University taught us. And actually, that's how we actually met, was this internship class. Is if you take an internship class, it's called a CPT, I think it's called, the kind of the authorization that you get to work part-time. So we managed to get these part-time jobs off campus that we could work and do all these things off campus. So I guess that's kind of just some advice to those international students out there, is reach out to your international coordinators, get that CPT authorization to work off campus and do these things. But I guess if you're American, it's fairly easier. You don't have to get these authorizations, kind of just apply. And yeah, like you would agree, it's kind of just go on handshake LinkedIn. You just apply like any other job, and it's not too different than any other job. And I'd say it's fairly if you're in the undergrad pre-med, it's fairly easy to get the job. I don't know what you think. I feel those type of jobs, they do like to give to the pre-med students.
I would agree. I think it is fairly easy. I think, brushing up your interview skills and being a
Yeah.
relational person, someone who can interact with people. And I guess you can do that in other ways as well, building up those skills just by working in student organizations. That really helps. I think something that I found personally challenging, I don't know if you can relate to this, is that
Yeah.
there's things that you encounter as an international student when you get to America
Yeah.
that that, that are just like part of assimilating,
Yeah.
and that sometimes is like an obstacle for it was at least an obstacle for me in the pre-med track to get these experiences, like very
Yeah.
basic things, like for like getting a driver's license,
Yeah.
buying a
Exactly.
car, and then
Exactly.
navigating like gas, how to get gas, basic, really,
Yeah.
really, really basic things. But then
Everything. Yeah.
like unless you have these things in the beginning, like it's harder to get these experiences. Like I couldn't have gone in the what do you call it, the clinical experience or the volunteering that I received if I didn't first learn how to drive here, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
finally save enough money to buy a car. So these are things that, like, I guess we don't talk about when you're trying to get experiences. Other things you have to have sorted out beforehand,
Yeah.
but they're definitely needed. So
Yeah, no, exactly. No, I didn't even think about that. That's, that was a challenge, in those early days. And, it's something that, I hope in the future that schools and I can kind of maybe help international students kind of navigate. Maybe like, I don't know, maybe potential solutions, get like, kind of like shuttle services to these like type of, hospitals or, assisted living centers for students to kind of take and work. So yeah, no, I think that's great. And after getting all this clinical experience, it's time for the big boy, which is that MCAT. I mean, when I took it, I think I've still got PTSD to this day after taking that thing. I think when I still have nightmares from that. Everyone asks me, like, how do I do it and stuff like that. I'm like, Well, you just got to hit the books and grind. But yeah, so you got a 520 MCAT, and actually I came to you initially because you wrote your MCAT about a year before me, and I came to you for a lot of advice, and you definitely helped me in doing a lot better in my MCAT than I would have done, and some good advice. But yeah, let's kind of talk about preparation of that MCAT. What books did you use? Yeah, let's start with that. What books and preparation material did you use for that MCAT?
Yeah, so I primarily used only two resources.
Yeah,
Okay, so I used the AAMC question banks that are available. So the AAMC offers several practice exams and also question banks that you can purchase. And the
yeah,
other big thing that I used was the Altius test prep program. So Altius is a company like Kaplan, like um, the Princeton Review that helps with MCAT preparation, and they for me they had a very rigorous program, and I used them to prepare for the MCAT in over a year, and yeah, and I think working with them really helped me
yeah.
do well on the MCAT, and now I mentor with them, so that's a lot of
Oh,
fun.
nice. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
what's it like? I'll just a side hop there. What's it like mentoring students then? Yeah, because I forgot to mention that you do mentor a lot of students now that are doing the MCAT. That's one of your jobs that you do. Do you enjoy that? Like, do you want to tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. I'd say I love this job. I have so much fun mentoring
Yeah.
students. I think it's just so encouraging and motivating to see students who are really trying really hard to study for this PTSD inducing exam,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, because
Yeah.
it really is.
Yeah.
It is really a challenge and really a big sacrifice that you have to make. You don't understand. I guess a lot, many previous students don't understand how much sacrifice is needed to do well, as in like get like a very competitive score on this exam.
Yeah.
And for me, it's very inspiring to see them, and also to help them move towards getting this score. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
No,
been
for
it's been a
sure.
good experience. Yeah.
And you mentioned like sacrifice, and I think that's a big thing. One of the things for the exam is the time that you put into studying for this exam. And obviously, during this exam, you most likely are a student, full-time student studying. You have to somehow be a superhero and get clinical experience on top of this. A lot of people like, ourselves, you don't just need that to have a competitive application. You need to have extracurricular activities. So we had to be involved in clubs and volunteering and all those other things. Do you want to tell us a bit about how many hours and like, you did again mention sacrifice. You obviously had to sacrifice going out on the weekends and all that stuff to study for this MCAT. So do you want to tell us a bit of like your study schedule and study habits?
Yeah. So oh my goodness, it was almost 2 years ago, but I know I was studying quite a lot. I think so. I
Yeah,
studied for the MCAT for over 2 semesters, so that's about a year.
yeah.
And I think the to do well on the MCAT, some reviews say you have to study at least 300 to 400 hours. I think I hit around 500 to 600 hours of
Oh, that's a lot.
hardcore MCAT studying, and I think my schedule varied depending on the semester just because of how my classes were structured. But I think I used to study about at least like 10 to 20 hours a week, depending on the week. And
Yeah.
in the month before my exam, when I really just wanted to improve my score and get to the score I wanted, I was doing it like I think easily 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a lot
Yeah, I know, and
to
that's
say the
interesting. Like
least.
you bring up the number like 12 hours and that. Like I know our
Yeah.
pre-health advisor always told us about the MCAT. You got to take it like a class, like an 8 credit more, or an 8 credit class. I guess is less hours than that. But like like you'd have to take it like a 12 credit class that you have to actually treat the MCAT as a class that you are allocating time every single day like a class and doing 2 hours on the studying, and then not just that, you have to do the practice exams which take up a whole day. I mean, those are 6 to 8 hour practice exams. And one of the piece of advice, and I'm sure you can attest to this, one of the things I was slacking off on in the beginning of taking the practice exams is I was not doing the time segments properly. Like, and I think that affected me in the actual exam was when you sit down and take the practice exam, do the breaks, the exact amount of break time that they allow, which is, I think it was the two 15-minute breaks and the 30-minute break. Like, take the exam like you would take it, same timing as well, like 8 a.m. in the morning and finishing. Could you attest to that? Like, you got to be really strict on yourself during those practice exams and make it like test-like conditions.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's something we even recommend to our students when we're
Yeah,
mentoring them.
no, for sure. And then also a big thing is they say practice, practice, practice. I know I did about 4 practice tests that the AMC offered, just the free ones that they have on their website. But to get a 520, how many did you do? Because that must have been like, you must have done a bit more than 4, I think.
Yeah, I think I did 15 practice
Oh,
exams
well,
in
then you heard it here
total.
on the podcast. To get a 520, you have to do 15 exams. And just to put it in perspective, just one exam, I think, takes a minimum of like 6 hours. So Visakuo, yeah, was doing 6 6 hour exam days. But no, I think that also would have built you. No, I think that's a great thing because that would have built your stamina on the actual day. Like the actual day feels like it goes faster than the practice exams. I don't know if you felt that way. So I think you built that stamina up to do that because that was one of the hardest things. I remember nearly fainting on the psych and social session at the end because I was like, I need some water or something, and they don't even allow you water in the actual exam
Yeah.
room. So it's a little bit rough. It's a little bit rough. So what do you think of the textbooks? I used Kaplan personally, but do you have any like a specific textbooks that you would recommend to students to use that? Because I feel like some books like Princeton is a bit maybe over, information overload that maybe is a lot of unnecessary information. And then when it came to psych and soc, I used a Kaplan review sheet. Just kind of some person did a review of all the Kaplan psych and soc and did a summary of all of that. Did you differ a bit in your study materials with those textbooks and that?
I didn't use any of the other textbooks you mentioned. I just used
Yeah.
the one textbook that Altius offered,
Oh
and
yes, Altius.
their textbook is very condensed. It's like it's one book that has
Yeah.
everything, and it's a very concise textbook that requires you to do a lot of the studying yourself by using
Yeah.
outside resources. So it was a very interesting way to
Yeah.
study for the MCAT because I felt like the textbook just gave me like sort of like um like a basic scaffold or like a framework, and then I had to really fill in the rest of the material
Yeah.
myself to learn. And uh, I mean, I guess that was helpful for me because I scored well. But I think
Yeah.
just based on my experience teaching students in terms of like what textbook I would recommend, I think if you're someone who hasn't done a lot of, let's say you've come out of college for a few years and you feel very rusty in terms of your basic sciences, then
Yeah.
having a very thorough textbook, or let's say like some of the Kaplan ones, might be helpful just to refresh your memory and learn those concepts in a deeper level. But I'd say like once you like with any textbook, I don't think just reading it and memorizing the concepts is enough
Yeah.
to get you at the content, we call this mastery, the level of content mastery you need to be
Yeah.
able to apply those concepts in the exam. So applying the concepts is very, very different for me, at least
Yeah.
from learning them in a textbook, right? And I think what's really important um, is that you're not just able to absorb a lot of information from the textbooks, but able to make connections between these concepts. Because what the MCAT does, and they love to do this, is they're not going to ask you about like what is meiosis and give you a whole passages of meiosis. And they're going to tie
Yeah.
in meiosis with something like cancer or the antibody or the
Yeah.
immune system, and you're going to have to make connections, right? So that's really the skill that you want to develop, and that's not textbook dependent. That's you dependent. You have to
Yeah.
yeah, develop your
Yeah,
skill
no,
that
I
way.
think you're so right. Like, it's very different from college where you just have to memorize all this information and the question is just, what is, like you bring up meiosis, like you just give the definition of like, match meiosis to the definition. They do give all those, like almost every question is based on those passages. You have to read this passage and you write it. It links to like some medical world like thing. So like, diseases, cancer, etc. And then they'll throw it in there. So it does, throw you off a bit because you're not really getting any hints. They're kind of trying to like you to cross link all the information. And, the 3 sections, the first one being physics and chem, and then the second one, which I'll speak to you now about, but the third one is biochem biology, and the fourth one psych and soc. I think those 3 are just major, just studying and like being able to link that information. But one of the hardest ones was that second session, cars, which was reading all these passages, like random passages about art, politics, and all that stuff. Then you'll have like 5, 6 questions after each passage, and you only have 90 minutes to do all of these passages. So you've technically only got 5 minutes to read a passage, then a minute to answer each question that they are asking to, answer about the passage. So you don't really have time to read the passage twice. You have to just read it once and answer these questions. Do you have any advice of how can students approach, these cars questions?
Yeah, I love this question. And I
Yeah.
love answering this question because cars was actually my worst section on the MCAT.
Yeah, well,
It was
we twinning there. We're twinning there, but
I mean, it was so bad. I was very embarrassed to talk about it for a while. But then I think
Yeah,
as I've started mentoring students, I've had to learn how to really tackle that section because then I had to teach students how to do that, right?
yeah,
I think um, I think there's several things that go into doing car as well. It's not just reading a passage and trying to answer a question based on the passage. I think
yeah,
a big thing that students need, a big skill that students need to try to develop, trying to answer cars, is to be able to get the main point out of a big passage that has a lot of information.
yeah,
I think if you're going to try to get one skill, is just learn to get the main point, like a sentence of the main point
yeah,
from this big passage, and then learn to use that with use that main point to answer the questions that are for that passage.
yeah,
And then like you said, the timing thing that you're talking about, like cars is definitely one place where you need to be very strict and diligent with your timing. If you're going to practice passages, make sure you're so it's the typical timing is like 4 minutes per passage, 1 minute per question. Make sure you follow
yeah,
that. And then if you have, I mean, if you're open to more practice, I'd say even try reading passages from history textbooks or other things like that,
yeah,
and do those timed as well. Find short passages about those, do those timed, and try to write the main point for those passages as well.
yeah.
So different things like that. I feel like I can't give the whole details,
Yeah,
but
no, for
it
sure. No,
might,
no, no, totally. And like a lot of
yeah,
people, at the end, we'll tell you how to reach your company and kind of like how to get in touch with you and all that stuff to get this practice in. But I think you're right. Like it's just practice, practice. Cause I think that's just how I got better. Online there's a lot of tools and that you can just go and practice all previous cause passages and just reading. I think in general, I didn't read a lot, because you're just reading so many textbooks in college. You kind of stop reading normal everyday books, and I guess that kind of affected my cause a bit, was my reading speed. And you don't really have time to go back towards that passage if you're confused about a question. So it's kind of that type of thing where you have to, I don't know, this is kind of what I would do. It's just kind of answer the best I can and move on, because once you lag behind in cars, it will affect the rest of the passages going forward and will really destroy that score. And but yeah, that's amazing. So the MCAT's all done. You wait 4 weeks stressing. One of the things do not do, and Visakuo told me not to do this, but I did it anyway, and it made me stress out for 4 weeks straight, because you're waiting for 4 weeks for the grade. Do not read the Reddit pages of how people felt about the exam. Just forget about it for 4 weeks and move on to doing other things, like your personal statement and all the others, things that med school requires.
yeah.
What do you think about that? I remember you
Oh, I
told me that
fully
in
agree.
class. You were like, do not go into the Reddit things, and I did exactly that. You start looking at the Reddit pages of what score do you think you got? Just forget about it for 4 weeks and move on to the next things. Because the next thing is actually the personal statement. One of the things that our pre-health advisor always said for that personal statement is you want about 3 stories of why medicine. 3 to 4 stories of why medicine. I mean, this is only a 2-page document, so you got to write so much in such little space. And she would always say, shout out to Dr. LaRue, I guess, for getting us into med school there. But
Mhm.
each paragraph she would say one out of the like 1/3 of the paragraph should be the story, and then 2/3 should be why that story links to medicine. Could you agree that your personal statement was roughly that, or was yours a little bit different?
Surprisingly, I think my personal statement was about roughly that. But then
Yeah.
I think it wasn't like I feel like the way that you describe it right now, it's like you make it sound like there's the third that talks about the story and the other third that's about the
Oh,
why
okay.
medicine.
Yes. Yes.
But then for me, it was more like it was very woven through. Like I
Yeah.
was talking about my story, but also um, talking about how that you know affected my decision to pursue medicine at the same
Yeah.
time throughout my personal statement. So.
Yeah, and like from all the personal statements I've read in that, I really do think, and I think you're right, like I don't think there is a really specific, formula for that personal statement, but as long as you're really showing that true, genuine stories and why medicine, I think med school officials, they really do like read that personal statement. And, now we're going to get to the next thing, which is the secondaries, which is kind of very similar. It's just those essays that, most of the time it's just essays schools would send out. So I guess that's kind of similar to personal statement. You got to just, make that essay good and really be genuine with their questions. But then you get to the interview stage. And this is why I'm saying I think they really do read your personal statement, because in the interview, they do know who you are on that. But I think yours might have been different. I know Michigan State, I don't know if we can't really talk much about that, because we do sign a thing saying we can't really talk about much about the interview. But they are very different with how they interview. Like most schools, they know a lot about you. Michigan State, they don't know much about you. You kind of, you go in and you just have to really sell yourself. But I think, a lot of people, I guess I'm going off topic here, but a lot of people stress that, it's medicine's so hard and that. I think the likelihood of getting an interview is pretty good. I think you've got a solid MCAT score, solid, a lot of schools Casper test, and that personal statement's good. You most likely will get an interview after those secondaries. I don't know what you can attest to that.
I think I'd agree. I think it also depends on the school. Like I
Yeah,
definitely didn't. I like even with my MCAT score and I have a pretty good GPA. I didn't get interviews with a lot of schools that.
yeah,
I guess it just depends on the school. A lot of the schools I was applying to were very top tier, and
yeah,
I didn't get interviews with them, which is fine. I
yeah,
don't mind. But then, yeah, I guess yeah, if you're shooting for schools and you feel like you're well above the average, their MCAT, their GPA, you feel like you have a solid personal
yeah.
statement, then yeah, then you have a good chance.
And I think you're totally right. One of the things that our advisor also told us was you got to look at the statistics of the school. You got to look kind of what is the minimum MCAT that they tend to take as an accepted student, what is the minimum science GPA and overall GPA, what they're taking. And I guess kind of just from like our research, if you want to go like DO and all that stuff, I think you got to really minimum have like a 497, 500 if you want to apply to med school. Otherwise, I think I would consider retaking that MCAT. I feel like that's kind of the lowest score that I know that got into med school. I don't know if you know maybe a different score. I knew someone that got a 497. But I do think if you start maybe, maybe a little bit lower than that, most schools, that's like their minimum. 495 and above is their minimum standard of, students that are taken in. But then I'd say GPA, what do you think GPA standards are? Like 3.5 and above?
I think for DO schools, it seems to be like 3.5 and above. For MD schools, it gets a little bit more competitive, like 3.8.
Yeah.
So,
And,
but
and
it
I'm
just
glad you bring that
varies.
up.
Yeah.
Like the MD and DO, that's very different. I think grades are very um, prominent in the MD schools. DO, I think it's the whole person. Yes, grades are also very much important, but I think they take everything else just as importantly, the personal statement, the clinical experience, all that stuff. So, you do that, you do the interview. Do you want to give us a bit of those interview tactics? How did, you relate to the interviewer? Because that's kind of a hard thing. That's stressful. I remember the whole day I had like just sweat stains interviewing with the interviewers and all that stuff. And I mean, it's just as exciting. Did all this work, and this is the final stage before you get that acceptance. Do you have any, any tips that you prepared for these interviews, and how did you approach these interviews that you got?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things like that. I think at, at the minimum, you should be very well read with your own application. Like you should know your application through and through because you could be asked about any of your activities. We have this thing called the 15 activities if you're applying through the MCAS, and I think there's
Yeah,
similar number of activities in the ECOMAS, and you should be very well read in those. Know your personal statements, know what you wrote about in the secondary, so they can ask you about them.
yeah,
And I think something else that helped me a lot was before I even interviewed, I reached out to the admission committees and I asked them if they could connect me with students who are in the program right now.
yeah,
And I met these students before I interviewed, and I asked them how what I could do to the interview, tell me more about their experience in the program itself, and that way I feel like that helped me connect with the interviewer at a more personal level because I just knew more. But yeah, I think yeah, just I guess like do the basic things. You don't know how to say your why, but also try to really get to know the school at a level that's not just
yeah.
I guess like on their website. You try to get to know them
Yeah.
through people who are in the school.
Yeah,
That
and
would
I
make
think
you
that's
stand out.
great advice because like this is you're dealing with people. At the end of the day, it's kind of like a job interview. They want to know, are you someone they want to work with? Because they're gonna have to see, they're gonna have to see you every single day. So they're gonna see, can you relate to them as a person? And I think just kind of like people skills. If you think your interviewer is a bit funny and likes the jokes, joke with them. Be a normal person. But if they're serious, take it very seriously because some interviewers do prefer that. Dress also for the occasion. Wear a suit. I probably recommend wearing a tux and a tie. I'm sure you agree there. You want to dress for that part. It's like you're going for a job interview, and most interviews they are online. So even if the camera's looking at you, still be fully dressed so you feel the part. Wear the shoes, wear the pants. Maybe not the Zoom outfit as they say. Wearing the pants because you want to feel the part. And so So yeah, so I think that's another thing. And then I'm trying to think like another thing in the interview is I think you gotta know your interviewer. A lot of schools tell you who your interviewer is gonna be, so you're right. I think asking people and all that stuff about the interviewer just so you relate to them on a more personal level. You know their achievements and stuff. So you just it looks like you've a bit of a fan of theirs and that. So I think people will like you. They will tend to like you with that because you are showing your enthusiasm and interest in the school. Because you're competing against top people that got an interview. So you gotta be that just a little bit better than everyone else. So you just gotta just know a little bit more and show your enthusiasm a little bit more. I don't know if you agree with that.
I agree. I think there is that pressure that you're talking about that you feel like you have to when you are competing against people who've done very well. So that's why
Yeah,
they've also done an interview. But I think I don't. There's some aspect of me that acknowledges that mindset, but also sees how that can be a limitation. Because I feel like the
yeah,
thing that matters a lot in the interview is your own authenticity.
yeah,
So when you come into the interview, you need to be well versed in what you're doing, why you're doing this, why you're
yeah,
applying in medical school, what your applications are, and know more about the school, and somewhat be able to sell yourself. But don't do it in a way where you're
yeah.
just trying to pander to the interviewer. I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
that has never worked.
Yeah.
I think
And also maybe
and
not to over prepare because you don't want to sound like a robot in that. Because I guess when I was also over preparing, it's you're just kind of doing these standard answers, like you search in Google for these very generic answers. You kind of want to just roughly know your personal statement, your whys, and all of that for all these possible questions that are all over Google of those, normal interview questions of like why medicine, why our school, and that. But you got to be very personal. So say what you think, but obviously, with knowing what your whole reasons and that are in mind.
yeah, and on that note, I feel like having your friends interview you instead of
Yeah.
having like a pre-med advisor. Pre-med advisor is great because they'll help you tailor your answers. But then just asking friends, having conversations about why you want to do med school with your own friends, with family members, other people in your community, that'll just help you be more authentic in how you respond. Because in the end, like Rona said, you're just talking to people, and people want to
Yeah.
know you genuinely. So
Yeah.
so just get good at being able to convey your story, how you truly feel. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I think that's the best way forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice. So now we're on like that final stage. You did the interview, you got in, so eventually you ended up signing with the DO PhD program in Michigan State. Now, one of the things that I think is like another hurdle that I never really considered to this point of once you're in medical school is the financial side, because I think medical school is not a cheap schooling option. I mean, it's an insane amount when you start seeing how much medical school costs. I know you got into the DO PhD program. How is funding working with that, and what's your view on all this? How to go about funding for medical school? And we international, so that's even harder because you can't just get any bank or cosign with you. I mean, sorry, not loan you money, and then you can't really find a cosigner or anything. So, what's your views on that?
Yeah, this is a very good but also a very difficult question because
Yeah,
at least for me, I feel very fortunate because of the program that I'm in. The DO PhD program at Michigan State University is fully funded, and they also provide a generous stipend for all their students. So I feel like
yeah,
I didn't have to grapple with a lot of the financial struggles that I know a lot of international students have to do when they're getting into med school in terms of like trying to find a loan and everything. So, but in
yeah,
terms of well, how do you approach medical school in the first place? Like knowing that you have these constraints. I think before you even start the application process, look at the fee assistance program.
yeah,
And I think a
exactly.
lot of people can qualify for that fee assistance program if you start early.
Yeah,
I think they open up around November, the year before the cycle opens. So definitely try to apply that. It allows you to send all your applications for free. That's a
yeah,
big expense saver because the applications are about $100 per school. You want
yeah.
to make use of that if you can. For me, free assistance even covered my secondary applications, which
Oh,
was
that's great. That's
awesome.
amazing. Because we're talking in the thousands of dollars, at least minimum a couple hundred. If you're rarely applying to a minimum, which most students do, 15 to 20 schools, you're talking thousands of dollars, yeah,
Thousands
with
of
the
dollars.
MCAT. And that's something money that students just don't have. And you're already paying for, tuition, all of that. And especially with us being international, the exchange rate just doesn't work in our favor sometimes. So, that fee assistance. No, that's great advice. That fee assistance, and I think they are. I can talk about just because my medical school was, I think that since you're in the DO PhD program, most PhD programs they do pay because they want people involved in all the research and everything like that. But kind of on a side, I've just gone into the DO program, so I'm not on the PhD side. But when it comes to banks and all that stuff, I think one thing I would encourage before applying to a school is checking what banks are they partnered with. Really find out the financial side if you would qualify to even have the funds to go to the medical school. Because I think a lot of the medical schools I applied to and was fortunate enough to get in, there was just no way to fund that because there was no avenues even for an everyday student. It would be like out of your own pocket, which is just absurd amount of money. So I think that's something that you have to check initially before looking at medical school is how am I going to fund this? And so yeah, that's great. So what do you think made you stand out that you got into the DO PhD program, which is you means you got into the DO and the PhD program at State, and then they kind of combine the two that you get both these degrees. What do you think really made you stand out that they said we want you?
Yeah. And I think I'm just having I guess a harder time answering this because I feel like I definitely did things, but then at the same time, I think I feel very fortunate and just very blessed to be even accepted into this program. So I will
Yeah,
say some of the things I did that I think helped me stand out, right? So
yeah,
I think the clinical experiences I had were very unique.
yeah,
Working with people with disabilities and caring for hospice patients, they're unconventional, and I think they helped me to develop certain relational skills that were very important that I could speak about in my interviews that helped me stand out a little bit more. But I think for the DO PhD program specifically, I think it was my research experience. I had
yeah,
very good research experiences at some RO1 institutes like the University of Michigan and the Banana Institute that
yeah,
really helped me write a pretty solid. We have these things called MD PhD essays that you have to write for the dual degree programs, and I was able
yeah,
to write a pretty extensive essay for that. And also after I graduated, I started a research job and I could speak very extensively about that job. So I think the
yeah.
research experiences I had, I guess just really just having that research experience itself, like the hours itself, was very
Yeah.
helpful for helping me get into these programs. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it sounds like, experiences really do matter. You've got to be getting those clinical experience, not just those grades. You have to be really getting those experiences. Because I think most of those questions in the interviews, you're already good enough on paper. They've seen your grades, you've hit the minimums or you've hit the grade point that they kind of are looking for the school. But now they want to know, why should we take you? Because everyone else, a lot of other people have got a similar grade to you. I mean, maybe not a 520 MCAT, but a lot of other people have got like similar scores. You're competing against people in that rough kind of aggregate of scores, but your experiences have got to be like you said, unique. I think that means a lot, like because they want to say, oh, this person's done something very different that the other 20 students haven't done. So when they are going with the admissions committee, they are looking at these applications, and I think you just stand out that even more, a little bit more. And I think that's amazing. And but yeah, is there? Thank you so much for joining us today. And is there any way that people can reach you or maybe contact with you if they need help or in any way going forward there?
Yeah, I think you can find my Instagram at like Tsurho V, so TSURHOV
Yeah,
7. So you could look up my Instagram there. I have a public account, and if you wanna DM me and you say that you found me from the Ronan Place podcast, I'd be happy
yeah,
to reach out. You could also just look at my email. I don't know if people can see my name here, but
yeah,
my
yes.
email is just my first name and last name at gmail.com. And if you just say that you found me through the Ronan Place podcast, I'll also be happy to respond. If you need help with MCAT prep or you just need some med school, application help, whatever it is, or even research, I can try my best to provide insights when I find the time. So,
Oh no,
yeah.
great. No, that's awesome, and I'll leave it in the description below. All the forms of communication you just mentioned there, and that's great. But thank you so much, Visakuo, for joining us today and giving us such valuable insight. I really do think that you had very unique experiences and those good grades, and I think you really helped me achieve those heights as well. So thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm sure it's really going to help the audience.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I had a good time.
Thanks.